to discuss Dracula. We have a lot of stuff happening here to discuss. So, well, we got an hour and 15 minutes here. That's enough to get a good first discussion. Um, so one thing, I'll give you a little bit of introductory comments on the book. Then we'll move into discussing different threads within it. But the first thing I want to say about Dracula is, you guys probably noted, it's written differently than Frankenstein for sure. I'll be interested to see what style you guys prefer. This book is what's called an epistolary novel. Epistolary novel. So a lot of novels in the 1800s and the 1900s were just not the 18 or 19, the 1700s and the 1800s were written in this manner. And what this manner is you get the story told through letters, diary entries, newspaper clippings, etc., etc. So you don't get an all-knowing narrator telling you the story, where you don't get the story told through a character's point of view. Remember, in Frankenstein, the whole book is told through Victor Frankenstein's point of view. Right? You don't get that. You kind of get the truth pieced together through all these different ways. So in a way, you have tons of different narrators here. You get diary entries from Nina. You get diary entries from Jonathan Hart. You get diary entries from Van Helsing, Dr. Seward talking about Renfield, right? So this is a really cool way to tell the story, because you get it told through all these different characters' points of view. So I've always found the way that this book is written fascinating. I've always really enjoyed this style. But it was a pretty common style back in the day. By the time Stoker wrote this novel, he wrote this novel in the 1890s. I forget what year exactly. I think it was 96, but I might be mistaken. By the time he wrote this book in the 1890s, this style was already sort of archaic. So this was an old style even by his day. This is how he chose to do it. Well, it worked. What did you guys think of this? What do you guys think of this style? I know I asked you to read the book fairly quickly, so I'm interested to see if maybe you got confused on the characters as you were reading it. Any of that? An audio book can solve a lot of those problems, because if you listen to an audio book of this, then all the characters have different voices, so you can kind of put it together that way.
I was confused reading it.
Was you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was too.
I was very confused. I ain't even gonna lie. And then I started putting the pieces together in like chapter 3 or 4.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting the way the author done that, because it kind of helped you get immersed in the story a little bit more, and like it always kind of keeps you on your toes a little bit. And plus, you get to like know the characters on a more personal level, so you can start to like get more immersed and feel what they're feeling.
I liked this aspect over Frankenstein. For me, Frankenstein with Point of Victor was just way too much minging. You only got his point of view most of the time. This one, like you guys said, it gives you a chance to get to know other characters. But I did find it difficult with 2 of the characters, because Stoker does a really good job changing from character to character, especially in his writing. So when the old man and his slang, and then the zookeeper and his crockery slang and accent, it was just, I found that atrocious to read and follow.
I'm with you on that. I had no clue what I was doing when it came to the zookeeper. I was like, what is going on?
Honestly, if I can give a really good criticism, Stoker should have did a perspective from the Count's point of view.
Yes.
If I'm being honest, he should have did a point of view from the Count, because that would have like put a little bit more depth in the story and get like the story from all angles instead of just like from one side of instead of like not exactly one side, but every other character but the Count pretty much has a point of view, but the Count doesn't really have one. And I think that's kind of strange.
I feel the same. Like he kind of like disappears. Oh, he don't disappear, but like he's not in the text anymore. It's just basically talking about, you know, Van Helsing and Dr. Seward and Mina and Lucy. I felt like it focused a lot on Lucy.
Yeah, particularly Lucy, because considering that the whole she turned into a vampire mysteriously thing, I kind of get it, but I'm also over here like, I want to know more about the Count, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something the film adaptations provide you. You at least see the Count when he goes in and drains Lucy's blood and stuff. I don't know if I agree with you guys on this. We will have to agree to disagree.
I like it. So far, I haven't read the whole book yet, so I don't know if later on if there is some type of point of view from Dracula. But I feel like he did that intentionally, so you don't try to sympathize with him because he's the true villain of this. And I recognized, and maybe it's because I'm such a supernatural junkie, the signs of Lucy slowly being turned, that Bram tries to subtly put through her and Mina's account of what is happening. I mean, it would be fascinating to learn Dracula and his origin story in some point of view, but I don't think it has an appropriate place. And the book does mention that Stoker does a follow-up book called Dracula's Guess, and I did just see that that's in the back of this book. So maybe he might put something like that in there.
Yeah, you kind of summed up what I was going to say exactly, Natasha. Like if you did get Dracula's perspective, it might invite sympathy. And I don't know if that's exactly what he was going for here. I actually haven't read that follow-up story. I can't speak to that because I haven't read that. So maybe I will.
Yeah, if I'm being honest, I'm not exactly saying is it bad, but I couldn't really understand how Lucy even turned in the first place. Was it because of the safety pin that like Mina accidentally stabbed her with, or was it something else?
No.
It was slow drain of her body to and if you look at supernatural renditions of Dracula, there's usually an exchange of the vampire taking the victim's blood and then giving them their blood in return, and that's the turning point for them to become the undead. And this it plays out where Lucy is draining blood and all these four men are supplying that transfusion, and it's when the final taking of the blood that her system can't support that she's turned, from my understanding of it.
I kind of already like I watched Vampire Diaries like a million times. I'm obsessed with like vampires. So I knew immediately when they were like, she's pale, and I was like, okay, I already knew the story. It's like he has bit her and she's turned into a vampire and nobody understands why she's sick, but she's really a vampire. I just had that in my head, and then
Bro, I had to figure it out as soon as Van Helsing started mentioning the whole, this is symptoms of a vampire here. And I was like, oh, look at me being stupid.
You wasn't catching on, Bella, if that's what was happening.
Yeah, for some reason I got bored in the middle of it. I was like, this is so boring. What's going on? Then finally Van Helsing came and I was like, this is actually good.
Could have been trouble from. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. I already finished.
Oh, sorry. I found it difficult to get into Dracula, and only because, and for me, we're jumping from Frankenstein and the aspect of that writing style into this, and it's just a lot of information overload. So I literally had to read a couple of phrases over because I zoned out, because my brain is fried right now. So you're not stupid. It just takes a little bit.
I
Yeah.
had to literally reread chapter 1 and 2 like 2 times because I did not get it.
Okay, here's my problem. I was invested in the first part, like when Jonathan was going to the Count's castle and everything. And when Mina started coming into the scene, I was like, who's this?
Right.
Why?
Literally.
Like, I was just invested in Jonathan's story because, let me tell you, I got some good quotes from that. Like, some of the quotes in that, I was like, yep, this is amazing. This is so good. And then it gets to Mina's point of view where she's writing a letter to Lucy, and I'm like, huh? What happened to Jonathan?
I don't know if any of you guys have watched the Bram Stoker Dracula with Keanu Reeves and Winona Ryder. I would suggest that you write it. So far, it's kind of true to the plot of the book. It does add some extra information. For me, Renfield's appearance in the book and how he is so obsessed with the master Dracula and how did that connection form. To me, that bugs me because there's no explanation to that. And in the book, they give you a lot of this references. They fill in those gaps, and it's helpful with reading the book and that, because I think it gives you a little bit more imagination into what was said.
If I'm being honest, I kind of think Renfield is either like in the process of turning into a vampire or is already a vampire because of like some of the behavior that he has exhibited throughout like Dr. Seward's diary entries. Like, you know, eating stuff and talking about Dracula. Well, not exactly Dracula, but talking about like blood and stuff like that.
Yeah, I just rewatched that version of the film last night, because I've read the books many times, instead of rereading, that's how I prepared today. I watched that movie.
Yeah. I've had to break it down. Like I've watched that several times, and I've watched a couple other Dracula ones. There's one other than that. I cannot remember what it is, and I'm trying to find it because I think it was a good rendition play on this book. And if I find it, I'll try to email it and might help somebody. But yeah, I have to, it's so long that I had to break it down. So I'm still finishing it up again. In Renfield's, I don't know if anybody knows, Renfield's, I have not finished reading this book, so I don't know what he will play in this, but I do agree that he has some aspects of the undead, though he's more servitude towards Dracula, not like with Dracula and how he instantly wanted to turn Lucy and that was his goal. It's kind of like, I think what he was trying to do with Jonathan. Jonathan is almost in a Renfield situation at the point that I've read so far. So that like in today's supernatural world, a Renfield is a servant of the undead. They're the ones that do all the errands. And depending on who's writing, they do have that undead desire of blood and gore. And
it kind of reminds me of H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu in a way.
I have not read that yet.
I recommend it. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I usually teach that. I cut it again in our fast version of the class. Yeah, you guys are pointing us in a lot of interesting directions here. One, just to make a quick aside, I would recommend that film that Natasha was talking about. It's called Bram Stoker's Dracula. That's a good version of it. It adds it makes Dracula a lot more of a sympathetic character in it. Like they make like this reincarnation love story theme in it between him and Bina. It actually works in the movie, but the rest of it's pretty true to the book. But I would also recommend the Netflix Dracula TV series that they did like a year or two ago. It's a three. If you guys ever watched Sherlock, the same writers of Sherlock wrote it. So it's a 3-part mini series. It's really good too. So,
I'll check that out. I'm always looking for new things to watch.
it's really good. You can burn through it in an afternoon. It's a really good little mini series. But if we're going to dive now into specific aspects of the novel beyond how it's written, I should first I don't know a lot about Bram Stoker. I haven't ever done a lot of research about his life, but I do know that he was a government official. He worked in England, Ireland relations, right? So, of course, you guys know that England and Ireland have long had a very harsh history with one another, even to this day. Most of it's due to religion, because Ireland is very predominantly Catholic. And England, of course, broke off from the Catholic Church, made the Anglican Church. But that's one reason among many why they've always fought with each other. And it was said, there's lots of speculation about Stoker's own, since sexuality is such an important part of this book, there's also discussion that maybe he was homosexual. There's lots of speculation about that. There's certainly lots of those themes in this book that we can probably dive into. One thing to note here that with this book, we're talking about the Victorian age. The Victorian age. This is this age of literature in sort of the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s, especially more so in British than in American lit. This is this age where literature was supposed to be respectable. It was supposed to be moral. It was supposed to exhibit good manners, good moral conduct. This kind of writing was very taboo for the time period because they never talked about sexuality and stuff, for instance, in a book. It didn't come up. Oftentimes, even in this book, it's coded, right? It's not directly spelled out for you. It's coded. And there's lots of interesting stuff here with this, especially with Jonathan and Renfield. And we definitely have to talk about Lucy today because how she's depicted in this is interesting. But this is definitely one angle that we need to discuss with this. Which character we want to start with is not just this sexuality in general in the book. There's tons of it here.
Okay, so I've had the same discussion with my husband. There are passages in this book and word usage in this book that does talk to homoeroticism. However, I think it is just because of the time period it was written. I do not think, in my opinion, Frankenstein has more of a queer feel to it. And it could be that, Frankenstein is written by a woman trying to write in a man's perspective. But I just think it was in the time period and the word usage that's why there's so many people questioning his sexuality. there are a lot of undertones from Dracula's first explanation of the three brides and saying he is mine. That's
Yeah.
we hear that.
Honestly, I can kind of see where you're coming from with the Frankenstein thing, because honestly, no one can't convince me that Clearville and Victor, I swear those two had something for each other. I can just tell. Like the way Clearville looked up to Victor and the way Victor talked about him, like, oh, I love my friend so much, blah blah blah. And I was like, okay, yeah, you two are definitely has something going on. And I can kind of see a little bit of that in Dracula, because like one of the quotes I highlighted was, "This man belongs to me," and I was like, okay. So I kind of get where you're coming from with that.
There are a lot, yeah, there are a lot of homosexual things throughout it with the different characters in Dracula, from Dracula to Jonathan, from Van Helsing to Seward, the whole sucking of the wound. To me, when I read that, I was like, that just depiction in him telling him to tell his friend about that was unnecessary to the storyline. That speaks, if you will, to a sexuality undertone of towards the same sex. So, and there are very many things, but my husband disagrees. He's reading this alongside me, and he's like, I just don't see it. I just don't see it. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to thinking about the earliest, I mean, even heterosexual themes in Frankenstein, in this book, if you go all the way back, this act of sucking the blood, and of course, usually it's from the neck, right? The neck is usually an androgynous zone. It's a zone on most people, right? That's exciting in that way. And from the beginning, vampirism has always been associated with this. The act of draining blood. It's a very intimate act, right? So, especially when a male vampire drinks from another man, right? You can kind of see how that would be very taboo for the time. I think it's really interesting that Tasha and Bella, that you guys are putting out these themes of Frankenstein. I wish we could talk about that last week now. Yeah, I've never really put two and two together thinking about Frankenstein like you two just did. You guys have given me a new way to think about it. How that relationship between Victor and Clearville seems very intimate in a way. Yeah, I mean, think about today, like even if vampire stories today, right? So much of them are overtly sexual types of stories, right?
Yeah, nowadays vampire stories, there's always that undertone of sexuality because, like you said, drinking from the neck, from the bosom. It's just nowadays, it's not so concerning that it's a male drinking from a male or a woman from a woman. It just is of the times. So it's not something most people focus on. So maybe vampirism is just not having any true sexuality preference and just taking the sustenance where you need it and how you want it, because you're the powerful one in that situation. Yeah.
It's definitely the power dynamics involved. It's definitely part of this. Yeah, so much of what makes the Count a villain is perhaps not just his foreignness, right, but also maybe part of the dangerous sort of sexual mores that this foreign culture might present. We'll segue over to talking about Orientalism and stuff here in a second. while we're on the subject of sexuality, let's talk about Lucy. And we're going to do some close reading of the passage pretty close to the end for the day, where she's actually a vampire. How scary that is for the male characters, right? But what did you guys think about Lucy and her relationship with all these male suitors?
Well, I thought it was kind of strange for the time, but like nowadays, if that happened, it would just be like, whatever.
I did find it fascinating that Stroker in two different passages, one through Lucy and through Van Helsing, making reference to her having multiple husbands.
Oh yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah, she was very lovable in her purity. Her virginity was, I think, what drew them, her virginal state. So I thought that was very fascinating that a writer of that time would make reference to pearl marriage, especially a woman instead of a man in that position.
Yeah, it's just a suggestion that when they transfuse the blood, right, that their bloods are mixed, therefore that's an act of marriage in a way. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting aspect here. Every man has to give up their blood here, right? Van Helsing, Seward, Arthur,
Quincy
the Texan, right? But she does. It's hard to argue that even in her virginal state, she doesn't seem a little promiscuous here, right? You can kind of see that there's lots of fears about dangerous, overtly sexual women here through Lucy. Maybe at first she kind of represses it, but when she becomes the actual vampire, that's when it finally fully all gets out. That's when she stops suppressing her instincts. So she goes from being a human being to an animal. Later she becomes a vampire. The passage I want to look at, let me find, I should have written the page number down. See, it's really close to the end of where we read today.
Is it the passage with when they're all in the cemetery?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, she's like, come here,
Arthur,
right? It's that passage.
Yeah, she's like, come here, Arthur. I'm going to bite you now.
Yeah.
That's page 188. That's the first. Yeah, I see where.
It's right before they put her down. Okay, it's page 199, chapter 16, page 199. Paragraph starts with we'll just read this whole page or so. So there was a long spell of silence, big aching void. And then from the professor it came. He pointed, and far down the avenue of yews we saw a white figure advance, a dim white figure which held something dark at its breast. The figure stopped, and at the moment a ray of moonlight fell between the masses of driving clouds and showed us in startling prominence a dark-haired woman dressed in the cerements of the grave. We could not see the face, for it was bent down over what we saw to be a fair-haired child. There was a pause and a sharp little cry, such as a child gives in sleep, or a dog as it lies before the fire and dreams. We were starting forward, but the professor's warning hand, seen by us as he stood behind a yew tree, kept us back. And then as we looked, the white figure moved forwards again. It was now near enough for us to see clearly, and the moonlight still held. My whole heart grew cold as ice, and I could hear the gasp of Arthur as we recognized the features of Lucy Westrandra. Lucy, but yet how changed. Sweetness was turned to adamantine, heartless cruelty, and the purity to voluptuousness, wantonness. And Helsing stepped out, and obedient to his gesture, we all advanced too, the four of us ranged in a line before the door of the tomb. Then Helsing raised his lantern and drew the slide. By the concentrated light that fell on Lucy's face, we could see that the lips were crimson with fresh blood, and a stream had trickled over her chin and stained the purity of her lawn death robe. I shuddered with horror. I could see by the tremendous light that even Van Helsing's iron nerve had failed. Arthur was next to me, and if I had not seized his arm and held him up, he would have fallen. Lucy, I called the thing that was before us Lucy because it bore her shape, saw us. She drew back with an angry snarl, such as a cat gives when taken unawares. Then her eyes ranged over us. Lucy's eyes in form and color, but Lucy's eyes unclean and full of hellfire, instead of the pure, gentle orbs we knew. That moment, the remnant of my love passed into hate and loathing. Had she then to be killed, I could have done it with savage delight. She looked, her eyes blazed with unholy light, and her face became wreathed with a voluptuous smile. Oh God, how it made me shudder to see it. With a careless motion, she flung to the ground, callous as a devil, the child that up to now she had clutched strenuously to her breast, growling over it as a dog growls over a bone. Then, after that, she says, "Come to me, Arthur." He says, there was something diabolically sweet in her tones, something of the tingling of glass when struck, which rang through the brains even of us who heard the words addressed to another. As for Arthur, he seemed under a spell, moving his hands to his face. He opened wide his arms. She was leaping for them when Van Helsing sprang forward and held between them his little golden crucifix. So that's an interesting passage. Just with the way that Arthur here, it's Seward here, Dr. Seward, right? He describes the repulsion that he feels for her while she's now in this, he uses the word voluptuous a lot, right? While she's in this like voluptuous state where she's no longer holding anything back, right? She's almost an animal instead of a decent, upstanding Victorian lady here, right? So it's interesting that he describes her as in this repulsion way. Seward at this point haven't quite wrapped his mind around what a vampire is, right? So this is all new to him. So it's interesting that he said the lady that he loved so much, he even gave his own blood for her. He could literally murder her right there, and he would feel nothing for it. Right? That's a pretty interesting characterization.
A lot of anger and loathing towards a woman of ill repute.
Right.
And is that because it's the times, or is it because Stroker, maybe he is homosexual? He does say a couple of other times in negative tones towards women when, for example, when Lucy, I can't remember to who she was talking, but she referenced herself as women unworthy of good and honorable men. So there's a lot of themes for putting down women and their worthiness compared to men. Again, is it of the times, or is it because Strucker is writing from a homosexual point of view?
Yeah. And plus, is it kind of that I thought, like, why he, like, wrote Seward like that was because, I don't know, I thought he was being petty because of the fact that he got rejected.
Right.
Very well could be. Most people do not take rejection very well. And any ounce of of any reason to put it back on the person rejecting you. It's what human nature tends to cling on to, because it's not not rejectable, that person, there's something wrong with them.
I think all you guys have points there. And if I was going to answer your question, Tasha, I'd say maybe a little bit of both. Definitely the Victorian mores parts here, definitely. Because women, think about even like the aesthetics of the time. Women wore these like corset dresses. Like if you see like the Pride and Prejudice movie or something, right? You see the crazy dresses they used to wear back then.
In this book, well, at least in the Dracula movie, based on this book, the women, the dresses that they wear, like Lucy's dress, is very revealing, unlike what they would actually wear in that time. And when Mina's running through the garden to try to get to Lucy, her nightgown is a little bit see-through, and is just very interesting depiction. But then again, that's the movie's trying to sell sex, so that's right. Just a topic.
Yeah, that movie definitely did it.
Yeah,
sell it.
Yes, it did. It did a good job.
Also, you guys are seeing here, if you wanted to write about Dracula for your paper, for instance, right? Just all this gender, sexuality themes, all that's really here. Even if you want to write out Frankenstein in that way, like what you guys were just talking about, there you go. There's an idea. Let's segue over to another topic with the book now. I want to talk about religion in the novel, because religion is it's essentially greed. That's how they fight Dracula. Talking about religion will naturally lead us into Orientalism, especially with how Jonathan sort of disparagingly describes the Eastern people pretty close to the beginning of the book. Right? He describes them as being so superstitious and all this stuff. Right? Yeah, so a couple things to note here. Did any of you guys watch the Netflix show Midnight Mass that came out last year? Midnight Mass.
Mm-mm.
This is so Midnight Mass pretty much showed that Catholicism and vampirism have a lot in common. Right? I am a Roman Catholic, so I can speak to some of the religion here. I don't know how much you guys are familiar with Catholicism, but one of the beliefs that Catholics hold. Catholics are one of the oldest forms of Christianity, going all the way back to the first centuries, right? Then on the Orthodox Christians are over in the East. The Catholic Church is in the West. Of course, around the 1500s, that's when the Protestant churches split off from the Catholic Church. All the stuff we have now, like Baptists and Lutherans, Presbyterians, all these different branches sprang up from the Catholic Church in the 1500s. This is why this is relevant to Dracula. One of the beliefs that Catholics hold is if you go to a mass, like near the end of a ceremony, like they do what's called the Eucharist, right? The priest prays a prayer, and the Orthodox hold this. The Orthodox do this too. They believe that they give a wafer, right? They say the body of Christ. And whenever they pour the cup of wine, they say the blood of Christ. Catholics think that that's a literal thing. Like whenever you go to the mass and take that wafer, they think that that's literally that stops being a wafer, literally turns into the body of Christ, the blood of Christ. So you're, in a nutshell, taking in Christ's essence whenever you have that communion during the Mass. So you can kind of see here how that seems a little vampire-like, right? But for Catholics, you don't pray one prayer saying, "Please save me, Lord." Then you go to heaven, right? It's a constant sort of act of repentance and taking in Christ through the Eucharist. I bring this up. Well, Stoker was Irish, right? So I think he had some Catholic sympathies. But Anglicans were the British Protestants that sprang up. At this time period, there was a lot of movement to go back to more traditional Catholic styles of worship. So Catholicism is definitely here. Whenever they talk about having a crucifix, you go to a Catholic church, it's not just a cross. You see Jesus's body on the cross. That's what a crucifix is.
That's what I was about to bring up, the crucifix. He thought it was gonna protect him from Dracula.
It does, right?
It's mentioned a good few times in the book when Jonathan was in the castle and he was all freaked out, and he had that rosary with him, and it made him feel safe. And in the graveyard at the end, like when Van Helsing was holds up a cross and Lucy goes away or whatever happened there, that's also another example in the book that shows that religion is a good player in the book, because it also uses a weapon against the vampires in a way, I think. I already know how to explain it. I'm not the best at explaining.
Right.
I did find it very, very fascinating, the religious aspect of it, but on top of it, the superstitious of it. These men of religion, Van Helsing, for example, there's a part in chapter, I think it's 14, where he's imploring Seward to believe in the supernatural. He mentions astral bodies, ghosts and things like that. So I do find it very fascinating. Catholics, I've been to some Catholic services and they're very ritual based. Everything has a purpose, and these rituals, these items of worship, they are tools to keep you safe from evil and evil invading you. I did love the religion and almost paganness of the superstition aspect of this book from my perspective.
Yeah, I think later in the book they use wafers, like the wafers that you would eat if you're taking communion. They use those as a weapon against Dracula later in the book too.
Yeah, Helsing says for the men to meet them back up and take pretty much communion of the body before their big quest, their adventure, and renew their promises to one another.
And so it's definitely interesting that for the vampires, of course, is unholy. So it takes going back to this sort of imagery to create repulsion in them. Hopefully, if you guys didn't know a lot about Catholicism, right? Hopefully, I explained a little bit of what they're doing there with the body of Christ, the blood of Christ. And if you take communion, that's a holy thing, right? And the blood-sucking vampires, right? That's an unholy thing. So you can kind of see how it's vampirism is this twist on this idea of the Eucharist. right? Whenever you take the blood of Christ and you become one with Christ, kind of see how that's a inversion of that idea.
I thought it was also, she was talking about superstition, Natasha was. I did the audiobook most of the time because I just couldn't, I did better with the audio. And it mentioned something about like garlic around her neck. I don't know if it's like a superstition for her to, you know what I mean? And then they stuffed her mouth full of, I think it was roses, something like that. But yeah, I thought that was pretty cool because I've never even heard of that.
You hadn't heard about garlic being a weapon against vampires before?
No, I've never heard of that.
That's a very common theme in vampire portray of a weapon against them. Some supernatural references to a vampire and garlic nowadays will either mock it because it has absolutely no effect on them, or it's the bane of their existence. It's poison to them, essentially. To ingest it is to die of poison.
Like, I mean, I've watched Vampire Diaries, but they've never, that's like in today's time though, I guess, you know what I mean? It wasn't like in the 1800s or whatever, they probably had something. But like, no, I've never seen that. And like, I'm like a really big fan of Vampire Diaries, and I've never.
I am curious as to how the garlic came to play in such a major role against vampires. I don't know the origin of that. That would be pretty, I think it'd be fascinating to know. I love garlic, so I'm safe. I use it in everything, so never have to worry about it. I do know that in Asian cultures, some Asian cultures, there are monks that don't ingest garlic. It's one of the things that they don't ingest because it blocks their chi, their energy, from the good and stuff. I have read about that. So maybe that's a play on that.
Honestly, I feel kind of sad for the vampires because they don't get to eat garlic bread.
Maybe it's the breath that comes from eating garlic. You know, maybe that's what draws them away.
Yeah. Could be.
Yeah, Stoker took make that. So much of what we think about vampires today came from this novel. But Stoker took a bunch of local legends, local folklore from different cultures, and like that's kind of how he made this book. Like vampires were part of folklore, but they weren't a central monster in our imaginations right until he kind of wrote this. So, tell me all the vampire things. So we know they're allergic to crucifixes. We learned that they're repulsed by garlic.
Sunlight, holy relics.
Yeah, then there's the whole stake in the heart thing.
Yeah.
Stake in the heart. He did that here, right? Lucy.
Cut the head off.
Yeah. I know. I seen that. I was like, okay.
It's just different because I don't know. Vampire Diaries, like, you do drive the stake in the heart, but like you don't cut the head off in the Vampire Diaries. Like I said, I've never heard of the garlic thing. And like in Vampire Diaries, they have like a humanity switch. They can turn it on and off. I didn't see anything about that yet in the book. I don't.
Probably the vampires in this book, it probably doesn't exactly have something like that. It's like a whole random, uncontrollable thing that just happens.
What about the sunlight? What's the rules of vampires and sunlight?
Sunlight.
So sometimes the rules inconsistent. Like some stories, the sunlight kills them.
Well, Dracula's always lurking around at nighttime.
Right.
But he is spotted. He is spotted during the day.
Yeah, he doesn't get burnt during the day, unlike how vampires are now.
That one guy spotted him.
Jonathan. Yeah.
Yeah, Jonathan just had like Vietnam flashbacks as soon as he's seen him.
Yeah. Kind of almost like a Renfield's outburst almost can be compared to Jonathan. I am One part that I was struggling with the Dracula in this is the fact that he can turn into a wolf and he has control over wolves.
Oh yeah.
So that is nowadays it's been so cut from any type of vampire. It's its own species. There are werewolves and there are vampires, but with Dracula, he can become the werewolf. He can have power over the wolves, control them. Because it mentions it in this. My husband had to point this out because I was having such a difficulty with accepting this concept of Dracula. He's referenced as Strigoi, and that is a creature that can transform into an animal at its leisure. He's not truly a vampire. He is just this entity that has these powers. So he's Strigoi. So
Yeah.
that I did like that.
At one point, I was confused. I'm not even gonna lie. I was like, is he a werewolf or a vampire? Because all the wolves are going crazy and this and that. And I was like, okay, he's a werewolf. And then she had the bite marks. I was like, no, he's a vampire. So now I'm just like, but I like that you brought that up because I never thought of that.
Yeah, I honestly just thought that like the wolves were kind of like his pets in a way. Kind of like a whole, here you go. You have a bunch of wolves that you now can tell you what you can now tell them what you want them to do. That's all I thought it really was.
Yeah, he can turn into a wolf. He can turn into a bat. Rats. Turn into rats.
Vermin, yeah.
Think about why that is, right? Rats are associated with the Black Death, right? That's the bubonic plague in the Middle Ages. They're often associated with causing that pandemic that wiped out half of Europe. Right? Rats are unfairly associated with that.
Wasn't it fleas
It was fleas, right?
that the rats carried to the city?
The flea bite caused the plague. That's how the infection was transmitted.
People still think rats are disgusting because of the Black Plague, but rats really aren't that disgusting. They just have a stigma about them.
Yeah. I saw your facial expression there, Hannah. You're like, oh, brother, rats. There's another rule with vampires with entering your household.
Oh yeah, you gotta do it through they're only allowed to enter unless you want them to.
Yep.
Yeah, I
I'll
know
learn,
that in the book.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
One
I'll
of the
learn that
books
from The
about it
Sims.
said, welcome to my house, enter freely and of your own free will.
What does that suggest about Lucy?
That she might have wanted to become a vampire.
Yeah.
One thing I am confused is the three women that Jonathan Harker sees. I don't like that. Does that ever come into play? Like, I mean, I'm still kind of confused about that, honestly. I kind of feel like, I don't know, I could be crazy, I don't know, but I kind of feel like the fair skinned one is Lucy, but I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it's like a completely different person or different character or, because I never really got that.
It's a different character. These are just random women that Dracula's infected.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then it kind of like confused me because it was just like randomly and then like.
They kind of seduced Jonathan there. The castle pretty close to the beginning.
Yeah. Also, this is kind of random, but I kind of noticed like throughout the book how Dracula's like person changed. Like at the beginning, he was like some old, creepy looking, decrepit man, and then like the time Jonathan seen him in the daylight, he looked young and vivacious and full of life.
Don't vampires not age or something like that too?
I think it's like something to do with. It depends on like if they get blood or not.
Yeah.
The more they take in, the younger they look. Right? If they go fasting,
Yeah.
then they age quickly. That's definitely another rule. I think that during the next part of the book, that's when Van Helsing explains all the rules. So like once they're trying to make sense of what happens with Lucy, that's when he explains all this stuff. So you guys will definitely get a lot of that next part. One last thing I wanted to talk about today is the theme of Orientalism in the book. I need to kind of frame this. This is a race, sort of a race theory way of looking at the book. But one thing to note whenever we talk about British literature, discussions of race are a little bit different when we're talking about British literature than when we're talking about American literature. We're talking about American, right? Most of the time it goes back to slavery and the Civil War and Reconstruction and how especially African Americans were treated. But with Britain, Britain's a little different. Britain colonized most of the known world during the 1700s and the 1800s. So they colonized India, they colonized China, they colonized large parts of the Middle East, they colonized parts of Eastern Europe, which is where our book kicks off. So whenever we talk about race from a British literature standpoint, oftentimes these foreign cultures are painted as exotic and titillating in a way, right? Exotic, like Dracula. And why is that? Well, their mores, their cultural mores are different. They're interesting, they're fascinating, right? You can kind of see how, but the British still have a superiority complex, right? We're the most superior culture in the world. So whenever they look at these other cultures, they think to themselves, oh, these are backwards people, right? Maybe they have values that are way different than ours. A lot of the discussion of what makes Dracula so terrifying a creature is he's this Eastern European count, right, going to London, which is supposed to be the heart of civilization, and he's corrupting London, right, by creating all these vampires. So he's bringing his Eastern European culture. He's trying to disfigure what they perceived as a more superior culture. So, are you guys following me here on how this works?
Yep. I'm just multitasking and working on this essay.
Right. Yeah, so you can kind of see how the racism's different, right, compared to America, where it's more overt. It's a little more subtle of a racism. But we see this here at the very beginning of the book, in the first few pages, when Jonathan's describing the gypsies and the people there in the eastern towns right before he gets to Castle Dracula, right? The lady gives him the crucifix to wear, which later saves him, right? But he's like, oh, these crazy superstitious people, right? They're always given the sign of the cross. The sign of the cross is another thing, right? They're always given the sign of the cross. This lady's giving me this crucifix, right? These simple, superstitious people, right? That's kind of like the tone he takes pretty close to the beginning. Gypsies have always had a bad rap, right? They were even part of the Holocaust. Like, it wasn't just Jews, right? Hitler killed gypsies during the Holocaust.
Yeah, he also went after disabled people and homosexuals.
Right. So you can kind of see some of this anti-gypsy rhetoric showing up here. There, we learn that the gypsies are paid off by Dracula too. So like that's why that when Jonathan tries to give his letter to the gypsies, they later take it back to Dracula and it doesn't go anywhere because they're in his purse. What do y'all make of all this now that I've kind of introduced it? How do you see this functioning within the novel?
Well, you did point out at the beginning, like when Jonathan was going to like Transylvania, like he noticed that everybody was so superstitious and thought they were strange, and he couldn't speak some of the language that they were talking about, so he automatically assumed that they were talking about him and stuff, which is reflects how it was back in that time, which Jonathan was like very hesitant and standoffish and paranoid. And people like that were like people were like that back in that time because they didn't know much about other cultures, and there was a whole superiority complex thing with the British going on during then.
Yeah, he had an uneasy feeling like the whole entire time, and then he got the crucifix, and like he had an uneasy feeling about the guy in the castle, and he knew something was off.
I don't think Jonathan really was a standoff with everybody in the beginning of the other culture, I should say. When the old woman tried to get him to change his mind, and when he wouldn't, gave him the cross, the crucifix, he could have rejected it based on, his beliefs of the time, but he accepted it. So I can see the racism and the cultural difference. It's just, for me, they're not really relevant.
Right, that's a fair point. Yeah, they do take to this imagery like the crucifix. They do take it and use it later. So maybe that's an admittance of this other culture maybe has a point, right? We do need some superstition on top of their scientific rationalism. In the beginning, he's a little bit condescending, right? But maybe it seems like he comes around. Right? It seems like it. Yeah, that's something else to think about. Maybe that will plant a seed for a potential paper idea. If you guys are interested in this angle of the novel. They do go back to Transylvania before the end of the book. I should point out that Castle Dracula is actually a real place. You can go to Vlad the Impaler's castle. Dracula is based off of a historical figure called Vlad Dracula, Vlad the Impaler, who was a noted warrior during the battles between Christians and Muslims around the 14th century or something. You can't actually go to this real castle today if you travel to Transylvania.
That would be cool. He does have a Vlad Tepesh, the Impaler. He does play a lot of material in the supernatural. He is the birth of vampires. The movie explains why. Well, so far, the book has not as to why.
Yeah, the book never will. The book's ambiguous about it.
When I have more time, I will research Vlad the Impaler. I think his story is going to be fascinating and terrifying and disgusting all at the same time.
Yeah, I heard a little bit about him. Apparently, like, I think he put some people's heads on stakes. And I think he apparently he either bathed in some people's blood or he drank it. I'm not for sure which one was correct. I heard different variations, but So I can kind of see like where Stoker was coming from with getting a little bit of inspiration for Dracula from him.
Yeah, this was when the Muslims were trying to sack Constantinople, which they did. They turned it into Istanbul. They renamed it Istanbul. But, yeah, in the Eastern world, that was a tragic moment for the Christian religion, especially when they finally conquered it. Yeah, very good. I feel like we've got a good start on this. We didn't talk about Renfield. Maybe we'll talk more about him next week whenever we're wrapping this up. Yeah, we haven't talked too much about him yet. We definitely let that thread out today. We'll cover him next week when we finish the whole thing. I think you guys will find the second half here is will go much faster. The plot picks up. The action starts taking off. There's less exposition. I should note here. I think it was you, Hannah, at the beginning. Well, before we close, I think it was you at the beginning who was talking about how you found those accents hard to understand whenever Nita was talking about them.
Yeah.
There's you another example of Brits and ethnic stuff here.
Yeah, his voice changes and it's very monotone and he's just like you can tell when he's talking about somebody else. Sometimes he even has like a country voice, I feel like.
Yeah.
Like he's more hick.
I think the guy's Welsh. He has that weird accent.
Maybe, yeah.
The Welsh have always been seen as inferior by the Brits. So, whenever they give that hardcore accent, right, you can kind of feel this guy's a simpleton, right? You can kind of feel that. Kind of like how we're made fun of for our accents.
I know.
Right?
I like British accents though. I wish I could talk like that. So I just sit there and listen to it and I'm like.
Yeah, you guys, by coming here today, of course, you feel the requirement for, so you don't have to do your weekly discussion posts. I'll give you a 100. So all of you participated. So don't have to worry about that. Wrap the book up next week. And, maybe start thinking about what you want to do your paper. You want to run an idea by me? If you want to talk to me today, I'm going to be on SS Connect right after class. I'm supposed to help people sign up for their fall classes. But if you want to catch me today from 2 to 5, I'll be on SS Connect. If you want to stop by, maybe chat, I'll be on there.
I have a couple questions real quick before you get off here because I have to go back to work. So on the you said we can do the essay and then combine it into like a research paper. Is that due if we do like choose to do that? Is that due this Friday or is that going to be due the 30th? Or do you want us to do the essay and then pick up where we left off for the research paper?
So do your short essay first, right? Then if you make it a research paper, you're going to add on to it.
Yeah, add on to it. Okay.
Yeah, you'll add research and maybe build your argument out more.
Okay.
So think about the short paper as the start. Then when you write the proposal, you'll already really know what you're doing because you're building on your short paper.
So is there resources required for the essay? I watched that video, but I didn't know if you wanted us to like cite the sources like you're wanting, or if you're wanting us to just do like where the passage came from, or from like the quote of the passage. Or
are you talking about the short paper?
Yeah.
So for the short paper, you don't have to cite any outside sources.
Okay.
Now, if you're citing, you do need to throw passages out in the text from the text as your evidence.
Okay.
So if you're writing about Frankenstein, you want to include some passages. So you would cite a page number you found that passage on.
Yeah.
So at the end of the line, you'd be like 32.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just
Now, I know you're using the Norton edition of Frankenstein,
Yeah.
right? So if you're using the Norton edition, you cite the page 32. If you're using a different edition besides the Norton, maybe you used an ebook or a Kindle version or something like that, cite the chapter number in that case. Yeah, because giving me a page number won't help if we're using a different version of the book. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if you're using a different version of Frankenstein besides the Norton, use the chapter number instead. But yeah, you said.
I have a follow-up on that. I do have the Norton Critical editions for both Dracula and Frankenstein, but it seems that my page numbers are off from yours.
For Dracula, I think there's different editions. It says I had the second Norton Critical edition. Do you have the first? This is what mine looks like.
Yeah, mine just has the face of him on there.
Okay, mine is the same because I was confused.
Okay.
Okay, because when I was reading the audiobook, it would say different things. Like it would say September 12th, but it would really be September 13th on here, and I was confused. But I have 2 editions of the book. I just realized that. So I don't know if they're different, but I've been reading this one.
I think that one might be the older version of the book.
So should I pick up back on this one?
Well, let's say you do your research paper later on Dracula, right? The later edition will be more useful because it'll give you more recent essays.
Well, I was confused. I'm with her on that because I was like, what? Like the page, the page.
So with that, do you want me to cite the chapter and the page for that? Okay.
That would be helpful.
Okay, because I know that for whatever reason, I got 2 Frankenstein Nordic Critical editions. The first one that I got, I think, looks like the one that you posted. And then I found a different one. I ordered them both. The one that looks like yours just took forever to get here. So I'll cite, if I do it on Frankenstein, I'll make sure to cite the chapter. Sorry, that was a long one.
No, I'm glad you guys asked this question because I didn't think that you might have gotten an older version of the book. It's just like it's a textbook, and you guys know they have to come out with new editions of textbooks for no reason. So,
Yeah, it's just silly. It's a scam.
Yeah.